173, Claude Moulinier.
Okay, and we should just announce that the witness that was due at 3 o'clock today has informed the Commission that he is unwell and provided a medical certificate. So he will be rescheduled for as soon as possible. Can you please call the next witness?
Mr. Ibrahim Afif.
Quran. Oh, yes. It's okay.
You can just raise your right hand. Repeat after me.
I,
Ibrahim Afif,
Ibrahim Afif,
swear
do swear
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the
whole truth,
nothing but the truth,
nothing but the truth.
swear to Allah.
So
may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help me.
thank you.
Our apologies, Mr. Afif. We will, I think it's in the witness protection room, actually. I've seen it in there, but it should be in here regularly. Thank you for coming again, Mr. Afif. We appreciate it very much. So this time we've called you in relation to case 0273 Claude Moulinier. In his evidence, Mr. Moulinier claims that following the death of Simon Denous and Mike Asher, two persons that he was involved in conspiring with to create some instability in Seychelles, Radio Seychelles began to broadcast the Room 412 complot in which his name was mentioned. He claims that he, on advice, I think, of a legal person, reported to the police and gave a statement and was later interviewed by Jiva Renee about his involvement in resistance activities. And Mr. Moulinier claims that you were present and you recorded that interview. In addition to that, the Commission has also requested that you give evidence concerning the one-party state radio show. It's probably not what it was called, but the radio show where people were ringing up and saying they supported the one-party state. That's the way it's being presented to us, and it's actually being presented as the radio show gave preferential selection to people prepared to voice a favourable opinion on the introduction of the one-party state, and was so effective that a referendum on the issue was then considered unnecessary by the President. So we'd be grateful for your evidence on both of those matters. Thank you. And you look very well prepared, which is excellent. Thank you. As usual, yes.
One for you. One for you.
The floor is yours. Thank you. Sorry.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. First, the dossier of Claude Moulinier. Well, in a sense, it's a source of embarrassment a little, because Claude Moulinier happens to be a family friend. His family lived on the same road as I live, maybe about 200 meters apart. And I knew his father, his mother, his brothers and sisters, and we used to sometimes go to his place as well. So we were school friends. He was much younger than me, but he was, I think, closer to my brother Mohammed. And it was ironical that his family was the first family, the first person, the first house that gave me a cup of coffee on the 5th of June, 1977. What happened was I had gone, that morning, 5th of June, 1977, I was the person who was scheduled on the roster to open the radio and present the morning program. It was then called Up and About. I was on my way to the station. At that time, we had no transport to go to work. I had left home at around 5:15. I was on the way down, halfway through down the Foynoa Road. Somebody came from the opposite side of the road and told me, "Oh, man, cab has been overthrown." I smelled alcohol, and I thought the guy was probably drunk, and I wanted to get away from him as fast as possible. But he kept on following me, and I had nothing else I could do. I went on. Suddenly, a car came by. It was somebody who lived at Foynoa, who I knew, but who had never in his life given me a lift, stopped and asked whether I wanted a lift. And I thought to myself, oh, that's good. I'll get rid of this man who's following me. I got into the car, and lo and behold, he also got into the car. He was also a friend of this man, you know. So then I realized that something was wrong, because the two of them started talking about whatever happened the night before. And I got the impression that as we went into town, the town would be teeming with camouflage men running about. That was the impression I was given. Nothing of the kind. We drove to the radio station. Arriving there, when I got out of the car, someone came from behind a bush with a gun, pointed at me. The people who drove me to the station, I've never seen them do a reverse like that in their lives. They went very fast. And I was left standing there with this man pointing his gun to me. He had me put my hands up, and I did so. I mean, I was quite scared. I wish I had not got out of the car, but, you know, there it was. And all sorts of thoughts were running through my head. What was going to happen now? And then I had a rucksack on my shoulder, which was laden with my lunch and stuff. It was a bit heavy. At one point, my hands sort of went down, and he reminded me that he had the gun. I had to put my hands up again and clutch the fence. I waited there for about 4 or 5 minutes, maybe it was less, but it seemed like eternity. And then suddenly a car drove in with a white flag, and out came a man who called out to me and said, "How are you, Afif? Don't worry, nothing will happen to you." And I was relieved. Oh my God, somebody at last who knows me. It turned out to be, and I didn't know at the time who he was, it was Mr. Ogilvy Belwi, the first Minister of State for Defense and the Minister of Defense. He obviously knew me somehow, and he reassured me, stay there. He went into the station. I looked at the station from the side of the fence. I could see Mrs. Marjorie Baker and Douglas Tiras, both were at the station. They sort of gave me a nod, but and then Mr. Belwi talked to them for a while, and he came back to me and said, "Look, we don't need you right now. We may need you during the day. So if you want, I can take you back home. And I said, well, all right. So I got into the car. This part is not really relevant, but I'll tell you all the same. I got in the car, I was sat in front. There was another guy. He had a gun, and his gun was long, and he put it out the window. But the nozzle of the gun was outside the window where I was sitting. So when the car was going round, it would take a turn. I felt the little cold touch of, I mean, I wasn't being threatened. I must be honest. I wasn't being threatened. It just happened. They did not realize the sort of trauma I was going through having this gun there. I mean, of course, there were no traffic rules respected. You turned anyway, and they got to a police station, and they stopped, and Mr. Belby said to me, look, I need to attend to something. If you want, you can wait for me in the car, and I'm coming out, or if you want, you can walk home. I preferred to walk home, because I thought, I mean, the idea of that gun was very much in my mind. I got out, and then I walked. I don't think I have walked that fast ever in my life from the police station to Forinoa to home. And there were people who were coming by in buses, called out to me and said, Hafiz, qui peut arriver? What's happening? I had no answers. I just went home. When I reached Forinoa, where I live, the family of Claude Moulier, they were standing by the entrance to the house, and they beckoned me. And I went in, and I sat down. I'm not somebody who loves coffee, but I think that cup of coffee was very welcome. And I sat down. They told me what had been announced on the radio, because I didn't hear what was said. And I told them of my experience, what happened. And so I sat there for about maybe another 15, 20 minutes, and then I went home, because I knew my parents would by now would be worried. So I went home, and that was it. So that was the home of Claude Moulier. I don't want to go the rest of the day, but so Claude, we were friends. After some time, I think Claude and family emigrated, because they disappeared from Forinoa. I don't know where they went. And so we lost contact. Now, when it comes to Complot 412, the plot, I think he was in the very first program, because when the tapes that I was given to work with, and he was ticked to be included, it was a recording, because Claude apparently had arrived that day from wherever he was to London. He had been met by Mr. Paul Chow, who took him to his house. And he was staying at Paul Chow's house. And then Paul Chow phoned Gérard Barrault at Carlton Tower, or he phoned the other way around, I'm not too sure. And Paul said to him, by the way, our friend is here. And let me speak to him, Gérard says. And on comes the voice of Claude Moulier. I recognize the voice. And I thought, oh my God, what is he doing in here? And then I learned that obviously he was working with the opposition. He was abroad. And I understood briefly that he was supposed to go to do something. I wasn't clear at that point what it was. And he talked about it. It was a very brief conversation, but that conversation was included in the first program, I think, of Complot 412. And that was it. And I did not know at the time the program was being done that Claude was actually in Seychelles. That was in 1982, September, October 1982. I did not know that he was in Seychelles until the day he suddenly was brought into the room at State House where we worked on the program, or at least part of the program, because I was not allowed to take out any tapes from that were handed over for copying, listening, and whatever. And that was done in a room which I learned later was Mr. Mankam's bedroom at State House. I must say I was very well treated there, as I told you before. And so he suddenly walks in with Mrs. Winnie, bring him in. And I say, Claude, we exchanged glances. I did not know what to say. Then Mrs. Winnie, after some chat, she decided she was going to interview him. She did not ask me to interview him. She interviewed him. And I was, of course, the technical person. I recorded the interview.
Was he interviewed in the sense of he was freely giving truthful answers, or was he interviewed in a different way?
I can't say he did not show any fright. He did not seem. But obviously he was very guarded in what he said, and I thought he told the truth. I don't think he told the complete truth, but what he said, I don't think was untrue. You could tell the truth, partial truth, and get away with it. You don't have to volunteer more information. I suppose that's what he did. I think he was at one time asked, was he sorry for what he had done or something? I don't remember his exact answer, but he did not say so on tape.
I think after this radio interview, he was sort of viewed differently by those that he had been working with. He said that he was never spoken to again by Mr. Chow or...
That I couldn't vouch for. I don't know. But obviously at the time, when you go into the community, people would be a little bit reluctant to talk to people who were associated with the opposition. It may be in public, but I'm sure in private. I would have loved to meet him that day in private, because I would have wanted to know a bit more, because he was a friend. But I did not get the chance. And when I heard him come here and speak, I thought to myself I would find out his contact number for me to talk to him. Actually, I once went to a conference in South Africa, and I knew Claude and his family lived in Durban, South Africa, and the conference was in Durban. And I looked up in the telephone book the number of the family. It was there. And I thought, let me just go and surprise them and say hello, to show that I'm not an enemy of you. We're friends and all the time, remain friends. But then I decided against, because I did not know what kind of welcome would await me if I turned up unannounced at their door. So I did not go.
Basically he confessed pretty much to going to carry out acts to destabilize the government in Seychelles.
Yeah.
But nothing happened to him after giving this interview. He was free to go.
Yeah. Well, that I can't answer that question.
Yeah.
Why? I had no power to pardon him or anything of the kind. That was the authorities. I suppose they must have had their good reasons for their actions.
I think those actions are what alienated him from the opposition that he'd been working with, because he was seen, given a radio interview, and then he was walking the streets. There was no...
But I don't recall the exact things he said in the interview, but I did not think that he said anything to belittle his friends in London. I don't think he did that. He basically stated some facts. Yes, I went to to South Africa, I think, where he would receive some training, and he was to be joined by I think, Simodenus. I think he was the other party to this. And they were supposed to carry out some kind of small acts of destabilization. That was the whole idea.
While he was let go, he was followed around and things like that.
That
You
I
never-
don't, I
you
don't
know anything.
I don't know. I never met him after, and he never told me about it. I heard that he was followed, but
Hello. Do you think, from his demeanor and so on, when he came into the room with Madame Gévarone, do you think that he was at all being brought there under duress, or did he look comfortable enough?
I thought he looked comfortable enough. I don't think he was shivering like a leaf or anything like that. No, he was fairly okay to me. I did not detect anything to suggest that he had been tortured or anything of the kind. No.
Thank you very much for giving us that. And now we would like to move to the other radio show. Thank you. We have some of those tapes, yeah. We have collected some tapes and things. We managed to get some. I'm not sure if that's in the list. If it is, you've got it on that. Yeah.
He would be in the first program.
First
Kuploka
program.
Stadus,
Yeah.
number one.
I know we've got the third one, and you would third and fourth and fifth. So we haven't got. Okay. All right. Okay.
I'd love to borrow that one day, because you won't believe it. After the program was done, I've never listened to the programs at all. Never. At the time I was doing the program, yes, I did listen to the final version before it went on the air. I did listen to, but that was under quite a lot of hectic work. So I don't. There was one thing I think with Claude Moulin he had mentioned that I thought you would ask me about, but you haven't chosen not to ask. So maybe I should not volunteer that information. One of the principal things he said was that we played a song by Mickey Mancam, Mickey and the Buccaneers, Pardon, you know. Well, just to let you know, the music was chosen by sometimes me, sometimes Mrs. Marjorie Baker, and sometimes I was told what music to play. For example, the opening theme of the program is Blowing in the Wind, you know, Bob Dylan. And that was chosen by me in the knowledge that was one of the favorite songs of President Hone, which actually was played during his funeral, if you recall. It's a song I like as well, and I use it as a signature tune for the series of programs. But the other songs, some of the other songs were chosen by Marjorie. And I remember once she told me, the president had been listening to the program, obviously. He said, I knew you had chosen this selection of music. And I said, how does he know? And he said, I know when I listened to who could be behind this one, you know. So that was. So we'll move away from that. We'll come to the Guy Amoy conferences and the aftermath. Dr. Guy Amoy. I think you wrote to me asking me to come and set out the role or the context of the situation. Now, Dr. Amoy phoned me requesting some publicity or coverage for his series of conferences. I'm surprised that Dr. Amoy did not recollect this fact. I know he turned 80 not so long ago. I therefore phoned him to fill in some of the gaps in his memory. He was very happy I did that. He confirmed that he did not remember the events very well, but happily, he said, he believed in me and did not challenge my recollections, and urged me to tell the Commission what I recall before my own memory fades away. I am some 15 to 20 years his junior, and by the grace of God, I still have vivid recollections of events of a long time back, embedded in the depths of my memory. I must say I sometimes have bouts of memory lapses of very recent events. I was not aware that these conferences were a joint initiative of Mr. Ivo Savi and Dr. Amoy until I heard him say so here. I do not recall having ever had a conversation with Mr. Ivo Savi, although I knew him. At the time, I had a weekly current affairs radio program called Rendez-vous avec l'actualité. It usually consisted of a few segments of events making the news in the form of interviews or reports put together to make a current affairs program. I used the slot to present one long feature condensing the 90-minute meeting into just under an hour. The meetings were held at Théâtre des Palmes at Montfleury, about 300 meters away from my home. This was around the latter half of July, August 1977. The consultations were held weekly on Mondays at 7 p.m. Anyone who cared was invited to attend. There were no specific invitations issued. The organizers could have urged their friends possibly to attend, but I was not privy to this. The first meeting attracted some 20-30 people. For the second and third meetings, the small hall at Théâtre des Palmes was filled to capacity, presumably as a result of the exposure received as a result of the first radio broadcast. For the first meeting, I did not note any obvious security presence. For the second and third meetings, there were senior security officers hovering around the venue. I remember clearly Colonel Claude Vidot being one of them. This was the first time someone pointed him out to me. I didn't know him before that. The entire meetings were recorded, including the interventions of the audience members who participated. The organizers allowed anyone to contribute. There was no attempt from the chair to single out any individual to take the floor. There seemed to be an initial reluctance for people to speak up, but after things warmed up, it flowed smoothly. People expressed themselves freely, and there were divergent views. I did not detect any attempt from the chair to guide the discussion along any particular political line. I do not recall the names and faces of everyone who attended. I remember noting one or two of my former teachers being present.
To interrupt you, who was chairing the meeting?
The meeting was chaired, I think it was jointly, but Dr. Amoy was the one who did the most of the speaking.
Okay.
And I recall one individual in particular who was present at the meeting because of subsequent events. One of my teachers who was present at the time was, you would know, Marie-Thérèse, that was Mrs. Joanne McQueen, who was passed away. I edited the first program myself using journalistic criteria and fairness as far as was practical, giving a chance to ensure every significant view was included. I was very proud of what I considered to be a very balanced report of the meeting. There was absolutely no interference from any of my superiors. To be quite frank, I believe I was trusted and as a reliable worker who would not do anything reckless or air anything undesirable. So I was left to my own devices. The first program went out 2 days after the first meeting on Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. I half expected a phone call or a rebuke from the authorities when the program ended. There was none. I phoned Dr. Ramoy the following day to find out his reaction. He did not tell me he had not listened to it, but he said people thought it was okay. Okay. I was asked if I would continue and come to the second meeting. I said I would. However, there was a reaction from the authorities later in the day on Thursday. They had taken exception to one intervention in the program. I don't recall the author, the person who said that, who had questioned the need for Seychelles to have an army. He cited the cost of a gun as an example. How much a gun cost, would we be able to afford it, etc., etc. Now, but during the day, interestingly enough, a letter was received, and it was immediately given coverage in the program the same evening. Now, that program was not intended to include letters of that type. The program was called Creole. And, but that letter was used, and I know from subsequent conversations that it was requested. I don't know who wrote the letter, but that letter was to denounce the fact that we did not need an army or the cost of guns or whatever. So that was done. It was not a very long letter, maybe half an A4 page. That was it. I think no one had anticipated I would produce a second program, which I did. The second program also went without a hitch. There was no interference, there was no comment, I was not rebuked, not scolded, nothing. No one said anything to me about it. The program went out. And I thought, hang on, here I've got a field day now, we'll carry on with the third program. The third program, Dr. Amoy even delayed the meeting because to accommodate me, I had told him I was fasting at that time. The month of fasting had started, and I could not come in for 7 o'clock. And I said, would you give me a 15 minutes extra? And he actually delayed the meeting until I arrived at 7:15 for that meeting. I told Doctor that was all, but I don't think he recalled that either. The third program ran into what I call problems, in the sense that I was required to censor it. So the first two programs went, everybody thought that was the end of it, and then for the third program, I was editing the third program on that Wednesday evening. It was between 4:30 and 5 o'clock. I had almost finished everything, and I was listening back to it to make sure there was nothing that I had missed out. When suddenly the door of the room where I was editing the program opened, and the door was to my back. I was facing the other side. When I turned around, it was President James, the former president, then at that time, Secretary of State for Information, James Michel, Minister of State, not Secretary of State. He entered the room. He was accompanied by one of his children, and he carried a Vaqua bag. I mention this because it was something that remained with me for a long time after. He placed the bag on the floor, and there was a kind of thud. I sort of turned a little, and then he said to me, you know, my shopping from Tembuji is rather heavy. So I thought, well, I don't mind whether I didn't think anything of it, until the bag suddenly fell over. And when it fell over, there was a gun that came out, okay? And I thought to myself, hang on, there's something that Tembuji sells that I have never seen before. I must go and check it out. I must stress here that the gun was not intended to intimidate me. I don't think so at all. I think it was the normal stuff he carried around at the time. Because there was another minister who also came up for a radio program one day. He sat down in the tea room while waiting for the studio, and out popped a gun from his left pocket. And those of us who were there, we looked at it and sort of smiled, you know. I don't think it was to intimidate or in any way to threaten me or to say, no, it was just a pure incident. But I just tell it to you because I'm sure if President Michel is listening to this now, he will remember that event. Well, he asked me to listen to the program. Okay. Okay, so I started in fact, I did not go right to the beginning. I started the program, I was halfway through, or not halfway, maybe a quarter way through. I switched it on to play, and then he allowed it to play for a while. Then he said, can you go back a little bit over something that had been, and then he asked me to edit something. Now, that was actually an intervention from a person who is still alive, very much alive. He's a friend of mine. And I mean, I've been on a board with him as well. And, but he's a very nationalistic figure. He's got very strong views. But at that meeting, he talked about the advantages and disadvantages of a one-party state, the advantages and disadvantages of a multi-party state. He laid out his arguments clearly, and that whole section was included in the program initially. But Minister Michel then said to me, he listened to the advantages of one-party state, that was okay. The disadvantages said to me, I think you will confuse people, can you remove that part? So I removed that part. And then when it came to advantages, the disadvantages of multi-party state and disadvantages, the disadvantages were kept, but the advantages of a multi-party state were removed, because not to confuse people. So then at this point, I thought to myself, hang on, this is not going very well. I told him, I said, Minister, but you know, the people who were there will think I'm very biased because they heard what was said, and this is an important part of the program. There was some debate after that, and they will think I have completely distorted. And but he said, no, people will understand. He said to me, you must understand the fact that these people who attended the meeting were people who he called les gens bien. Okay, that was and not the grassroots. So we were reflecting the views of the elite, so to speak, rather than the grassroots people. That's what in a sense, what he said. I mean, I don't agree with the editing, but I agree that those who attended these meetings were more or less those who were interested in such things. At that time, the grassroots and others, I think, had more important issues of bread and butter to think of. They were not interested in the Charter of Human Rights. This sort of thing wouldn't have interested them at all. They were more interested in issues like health, education, and this sort of thing. And I think there wasn't that amount of people clamoring to attend a meeting like that. But what I would call the elite, the intellectual, whatever you want to call it, they obviously found this interesting, and they thought they could make a contribution, and they came out for the meetings. So when the program was edited, I could not contest it. I mean, it was my minister who was there who was telling me I did it. And I think when I was actually doing it, for the rest of the program, I didn't even listen to what was going on, because in my mind I was thinking, I've now done something which, you know, has disturbed me. But anyway, the program went out, and I thought, well, this will be the last program I'll do. But, and I was thinking of a way to find an excuse to go and say, I will stop the program. But fortunately for me, they stopped the program. They said to me, look, that was a very good program. In fact, I was praised. It was a very good program, and you have now set a standard, and others should learn about it, should learn how to do it. You should allow others to do it. So I was supposed to teach how to do it to Douglas Tedderast. Now, that was a joke, because Douglas Tedderast had been at the radio long before me, okay? When I was still at school, Douglas was at the radio. So I thought the idea of me trying to teach Douglas, you know, it wasn't, but I know it was an excuse. So the program was handed over to Douglas. I went to the next meeting, not with Dr. Amoy, because then I went to Dr. Amoy, and I said to Dr. Amoy, I mean, I've met him in his clinic only twice, once for a medical condition, and the second time was on the day after the broadcast of the edited program. I went to him and I said, "Doctor, I'm sorry, I can't continue the program. The program was edited, and I don't want to continue doing it if it's going to be edited like this." And he said to me, "I understand." Okay, that's what he said. Didn't talk a lot, and I was out of his clinic very quickly. And that was the end of the conversation. I don't recall speaking to Dr. Moy about it afterwards. So the program was now done. They bussed in people to Gothas Center, somewhere at Gothas. It was, I don't know whether it was a school hall or something at Gothas, the next meeting. And these were people who were supporters of the party, I presume, and who were bussed in for this conference. The conference was chaired by someone who has already come to the commission. I have not mentioned to him that I would mention his name, so perhaps I could tell you, I could write down his name. He has since distanced himself from the party. Okay. And he had run the program. I attended the meeting to see how this was going. And I listened to the program afterwards, and the program was not edited according to journalistic rules. You know? But I didn't expect anything else, because I've now got a taste of how it was going to be. I just allowed the program to go through. I mean, I didn't have to allow it. It went through.
So when you mean not edited in accordance with journalistic rules,
yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
Only certain views were allowed. Okay? So it was a bit of distortion. But you listen to the program, it was a distortion of what was. When I say distorted, I don't mean you took somebody's statement and distorted it. No. But if, let's say, 4 people said they should lead one party, those 4 got in. The one who said one party, there were probably one would have, and then the rest would have gone. But there weren't many people at that meeting, to tell you the truth, who said we need a one party. There was one individual, I recall. One individual, I don't know who it was, but I was very disinterested by this point, and I did not. But there were maybe 2 or 3 subsequent meetings I did not attend. Okay, now to suggest that on the basis of those tapes, you could decide what the population of Seychelles wanted is really, taking things to the extreme. Okay? Because if you do a kind of census or something, you have to take into account a number of factors, like from what level of society across the country. You've got to have a balanced audience to be able to cover. There was none of that. And I don't even know whether the tapes ever survived. I mean, I heard later that they were used, but I don't think. Now, the program that I edited, Rendezvous, it would not have been kept, because it was deemed at that time the archiving concept was not very strong at radio stations. And also it was a current affairs program. Every week there was a new program. It was just, so I don't think I kept the program.
You said the next meeting at Grandance was chaired by this other person.
Yeah.
So had Yvon Savi and Dr. Amoy been taken out of this, or what
I
had
don't think they
happened?
were taken out. They stopped their own program, I think.
Oh, okay.
And they did not attend the
other
Goantas program.
meetings.
I don't think anybody told them to stop. I don't believe so. They must have done it on their own. That's my guess.
Do you think you're going and saying, I can't do this anymore because the editing would have influenced that decision? I mean, because...
You mean with Dr. Amoy?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. Probably, I don't know. I told him the truth.
So what you edited, how did it look in relation to what you edited out? Where was the balance in those meetings? Was it for one-party state or was it for multi-party democracy?
No, I think in the meetings I attended at TRNUC, it was leaning towards multi-party democracy. That was my feeling. But it wasn't that obvious, you know. There were maybe one or two people who said, you know, we need a one-party state because, like, I think there was an example, if I'm not mistaken, given by Singapore, where you have a strong man, but who did the right things, you know. And you need, when you have, in fact, that argument was brought out in the sequence of arguments and the advantage, the disadvantage. When you have a multi-party and you have to consult everybody to agree on something, it takes time and so forth. With one party, a good leader, you go ahead and do whatever you need to do. That was a sort of argument. But no, I don't think it was in favor of a one party. One party, it was, but there was no obvious thing to say this was leading to multi-party, the meeting. No, because the questions were very varied from,
That time, those in power, they couldn't attend the meeting or what? Some big figures.
No, there were no big figures attending. Which meeting? The meeting at
those meetings.
The ones at the TRNUC, I don't recall.
Ministers or?
No, there were no, not to my knowledge, there were no ministers present in those meetings. I'm sure if there were ministers present, my editing would have been probably supervised.
And the man that you said set out the case for one-party advantages, disadvantages, multi-party advantages, disadvantages, can we have his name? You remember his name?
I know him very well. I could provide you his name, but I didn't tell him. I have not told him I would. But I have spoken to him about it. He remembers. I'm sure he remembers because I've told him a couple of times. I'm sorry, you know what I did? I've told. That was a long time ago. But even recently, and I think he would remember very well. I could provide you his name. He's a very. So he's got some very strong views on certain issues. He's a entrepreneur, very well-traveled, I would say. And he also created an industry for him. I remember one time he sent Minister Michel, that was not about maybe shortly before I left SBC, that must have been about 2007 or 2008. Minister Michel, President Michel then, he asked me, could you do a program to advertise him? Okay, I don't want blanket advertising, but could you give him some airtime so he could explain how his industry worked and successful and whatever, to give him airtime so the industry as a local entrepreneur. When I called him to say that I want to do this program, he categorically refused. He said to me, look, Ibrahim, I'm sorry, I will not go on television to talk about my program. There are too many jealous people around, he said to me. And when Sishuwa is successful, somebody might try to hijack his project and his idea and whatever. Therefore, he rather remain in the background, get on with his project, do his business, and rather than come out in the limelight on television. He didn't want to. So I went back to him, and he told me even if president tells me to do that, I won't do it. You know? So I did go back to the president. I said, look, I was unsuccessful to get him to come on television. But I think he's a friend of the president. There was nothing further. Although, I must say, after, in recent years sometime, he must have been, I heard a report which referred to his products on the air, but I don't recall seeing him explain anything.
If we could have his name, that would be.
Oh,
The other thing, there's a curious, and I recall one individual in particular because of subsequent events, was crying out for an explanation.
I will call him today and tell him I have given his name to. No. I hope he doesn't.
Yeah, and also you said you recalled one individual in particular that was attending these meetings because of subsequent events.
But that's the person.
Oh, this is this one.
This is the person.
Aha, okay. So when one-party state was announced as the way to go, you were surprised or not?
Well, I didn't know at that time it was based on the radio programs at all. Because I recall doing an interview with Minister Balwi. And I said, during that interview, I said, I think we're going towards elections. And I said to him, I said, Minister, supposing in the elections, your party loses, and another party comes to power, and they don't want the army. You've set up the army, okay? You've set up the army. What would happen to the army? And that was the question I put to. I was rather naive to ask him the question, but I asked him the question, and he said to me, "I know the answer to the question, but I can't tell you now. You have to wait." I said, "But surely you." He said, "No, I know the answer to your question, but it's not the time for me to tell you." So when it was one party, I thought, it was. It didn't surprise me because that solved the problem of the army.
Do you think support for the army figured large in the decision to have a one-party state, or?
I really don't think so. I think President Wane had decided on what he wanted to do, how he wanted. I mean, I'm sure most of us would acknowledge that President Wane was somebody who was sharp. He was always 10 steps ahead of anybody else. He was a very good strategist. I mean.
But if you'd gone to multi-party democracy, would you have needed the army? Why did you need the army?
There are countries where there are armies where there's multi-party. So, I mean, I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Yeah.
But in the context of Seychelles, there were people who thought the army was. But
So the program was handed over to Douglas Cedras. So he didn't run the same show. No,
I mean,
just given the spot.
Not the slot. My slot remained for Rendezvous avec l'actualité. I put other things in there, but the debates of Dr. Amoy did not get on the air again, and I don't think there were any more meetings. I'm not sure. I don't think he organized more meetings after I told him that I was not recording him anymore.
So handing over the program was really nothing.
No.
You didn't actually.
No, because I had other programs to do.
Who had organized these meetings? I mean, who had called for these meetings?
As far as I know, at that time, I thought it was Dr. Ramoy, because Dr. Ramoy was, I saw him as a sort of social democrat who wanted to see things, who wanted, he was very interested in development and stuff. He was very much like that. I remember the first time I met Dr. Ramoy when I was at school. I was in Form 2, I remember. And I told Dr. Ramoy that the other day when I spoke to him. He came to give a careers lecture. And I was in Form 2A, I remember. And he was telling people, the students, to work hard, that the country needs all of you, etc., etc. We need doctors, we need this, and so forth. And then he turned around to me and he said, I was in the front row. And he said to me, what do you want? Do you want to be a doctor? I said, doctor, no, not a doctor. And he said to me, but you could be a hospital manager. And I thought to myself, good heavens, what? What makes him think I could be a hospital manager? At that time, I thought even to be a hospital manager, you needed to have some kind of medical background, which is, of course, not true. In management, you can be manager of anything as long as you know management principles and how to manage. But at that time, I thought to myself, he certainly wants me to go into medicine. But that was the only thing I recall of him before. But Dr. Ramoy was popular. One of his, two of his relatives were at school with me. Robert Chongsang, David Amoy. I don't think there's anything wrong mentioning my friends at school here.
But had he done these meetings on his own initiative, do you think?
I don't know how it came about. I heard him say here that it was him and Ivo Savi who organized that.
Yes,
but I was not party to that information. I did not know. I didn't even know any involvement of Ivo Savi until I heard him say. I think he probably was there, the band sitting at the front with him.
But who told you to go and
Dr. Ramoy
do the recording? So Dr. Ramoy
Dr.
told
Ramoy
you,
himself phoned me. I presume because I was doing a radio current affairs program and he wanted some coverage. So in those days, it was just pick up the phone, phone the radio, speak to me, and, I was. And this was in July, August 1977. At that time, not very many strict measures had come in. I remember immediately after the coup, we had to run the news summaries. We had to prepare them by 10 o'clock in the morning for broadcast at lunchtime. It had to go to the Minister of Information and come back for us to broadcast. That was done for a while. Subsequently, news stories would go to Minister Michel. He was the Minister of Information. It would come back with his green pen, And I used to look at the news script to find out what he had actually edited or deleted or something. And I thought to myself, he really is sharp, He would change a word here or there, and it made all the difference, And I could understand his line of thought, what he wanted. It was never distorted, but, when you write a text, it just takes a couple of words to make the text different.
Yes.
Yeah, but I actually told him, I am learning from you, because I look at every time he corrected a text, I look at what he had removed. That was even to the point of there was we used to do the quiz program on the radio. All the quiz questions would have to go to the minister. Yeah. Yeah. And there was once when the minister was not there, his principal secretary, he sent me the questions back. He had looked at, and one of the questions was, which is better, capitalism or socialism? One could tell me anything. How on earth was I going to? That was I did not use it. I just replaced it with another question. Because there was, when I started the quiz program, I started it at the suggestion of Mr. Georges Roulet. I don't know whether you remember him. He used to be the person who was, he was the first person who started an early morning program on the radio called The Early Morning Show, Georges Roulet. And he was a South African who had come here and who saw that there was a need, and he introduced a morning show, and he actually paid the radio station to broadcast the morning show. But he would find advertisers who would give him advertisements, and that's how he funded the program. He paid for the technician, he paid for the airtime as well, and that's how the program was. Later on, he had a program called Seychelles Magazine, sponsored by British Airways. And he was the one, after the coup, that Minister Michel or the authorities used to say, can you reorganize the radio a little bit? Make it more, because for all intents and purposes, radio stations until that time, until the coup, was largely not a national service, in the sense there weren't many national programs. Mr. Green would recollect that, because his brother, I don't know whether his older or younger brother, Gilbert Green, he used to be a part-time announcer at the radio. And most of the programs were BBC programs or programs from Deutsche Welle. There was only one Creole program on the whole of radio in a week that was called Creole Program on Sunday evenings at 7:15. And that was Histoire Sungula, Kusupa, and whatever, which Gilbert Confet used to tell, with Gilbert Confet, Samuel Akouchou's stories and so forth. And that program was the real Creole program. The next Creole program that was introduced was Coin Creole. It was that program, Coin Creole, that Douglas read that letter I talked about earlier. And really, the station was given a national flavor after the 5th of June. Not that before that nobody really was interested in promoting. I didn't feel, for example, when I finished school, when I wanted to go on a journalism course, I wasn't initially given one. There's none. It wasn't a priority. So that was the way things were. But after that, lots of local programs were introduced, and Georges Roulet was behind it. Before that, there was the French. The French was, because there was the language fight was always there, and it was Yves Lopinto who popularized French on the radio. Prior to that, you had 2 half-hour programs on the radio, Causerie littéraire by Alliance Française, and Faites votre choix, a request program. It was a Tuesday and Thursday. That was all. But when Yves Lopinto came in, that was because then the French were sort of pushing for more French on the air. He used to have a program called half-hour program, Avant d'aller vous coucher, pourquoi ne pas écouter Radio Seychelles avec Yves Lopinto. Bernard Georges used to feature on some of the programs. And then he introduced also at the time l'anthologie du mystère. That was introduced at that time as well. And then, yeah, so these were, these were the early days of the revolution in radio. And I think a lot of credit must go to Minister Michel, because he was very fervent on changing the character of the radio. I often was labeled, jokingly or otherwise, as a little BBC puppet, because I used to like BBC programs, and they removed. For example, we used to have BBC News regularly broadcast every evening at 8 p.m. It was a relay of the BBC News, and that was later on. It was at 7 o'clock in the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon. BBC News, press review, financial news, and whatever at 1 o'clock. And in the evening, BBC News and commentary, which was 15 minutes from 8 o'clock. It was relayed from London. But it was stopped. We stopped relaying the BBC like that in November 1977, when the first bulletin in Creole, in English and even Creole, of international news. The first news in Creole was about 1966 by Gilbert Confet at that time, These were the legends of radio, Tonio Baudouin, Gilbert Confet, Amy Etienne. These were legends of the time.
Are you going to write the story of all of this?
I don't think I have the time to do that.
Ask, you know, the sending everything to the Minister of Information to check, how long did that practice last for?
It did not last for very long, perhaps about 3 months. But there were hilarious moments in this episode. After that, one day I remember presenting the 1 o'clock news. I'll give you 2 incidents. 1 o'clock news, and we had to look for news, countries we didn't like. We would, there were people who were editors also who came up with news bulletins. If you listen to the news bulletin, you would have thought there was no fairness. In the way that we describe some countries, we would describe, for example, at that time, Morocco, for example, was in the bad books because of the Polisario Front, and Algeria would be in the very good books, etc., etc. So I remember one day remembering the list of countries we were not supposed to be very friendly with. The price of salt had just gone up in Israel, and but I just thought, oh, that would be a good item because it would fit into the general character of what was required. And I put that news item out, and I was called, not by the minister, but somebody below. He says to me, "What is all this?" And I thought maybe I shouldn't have been. I said, "No. Where was this?" I said, "In Israel." He said, "But that country doesn't exist." And I sort of looked at him blankly. The country doesn't exist. How could the price of salt go up in a country which didn't exist? That was one of the things that stuck me in my mind. The other one was, this was actually the minister himself who called me. I talked about the population policy in China. And that did not go down very well. I was called, and I was told that China is controlling the world's population because otherwise there would be an explosion. It's a wise decision, whatever. Today the Chinese are asking for more babies to be. Okay. I suppose this doesn't really fall within the remit of your commission, but. Yeah.
So after the 3 months of interference, the tone of what was going to be acceptable was established.
Yeah, but we knew what were the rules to play. There wasn't a set of rules to say you must do this, you must do this, you must not do this. There wasn't a set of rules, and but we knew from being corrected and, in a sense, taught, because there were also political education classes for us at that time. So we knew where we went. In fact, one hilarious moment was there was a map of the world, a map of Africa, which was stuck on the newsroom door. And we had somebody who took a highlighter and put all the countries which were socialist, okay, that were our friends, basically, to speak. And there was a French journalist at that time who was there. He's still, I think, there. It was called Jacques Plana. I don't know if you remember Jacques Plana. He came and he told us, he looked at the list, he said, "Nous avons très peu d'amis, pas beaucoup." So we don't have many friends. But that was, he was joking. But that was the way it was. But nobody was ever punished or sort of deprived of his job because of those things. No, if you make mistakes, they corrected you, but there was never sort of a whip to put you in line. No. It was very, I suppose they knew that we had to be re-educated in the sense, or educated. I mean, so
So your political education, how did that take place?
it was all to show that how good socialism was. And tell you the truth, deep down, as a Muslim, I agree with many of the socialist principles. I don't, I think, you know.
Was it like, did someone come to the radio station and give you classes, or did you?
There were some classes organized, but they didn't last very long, these classes. I think there were more lessons for us to learn how to write Creole at the time than there were for political education. They must have lasted about 2-3 months. And I suppose we were qualified enough after that to carry on our own. It's not as if we were in primary school, we had to learn from A to Z. I mean, it was really to get us to think in a different way and to show that the worst excesses of capitalism, and to show how socialism was a good thing. I remember one day in a meeting, I will not go into details of that meeting because that would be, although it is hilarious, after that minister reached out on his book, on his table, gave me a little booklet, Sekou Touré on Islam, okay? Because
I'm pretty sure you didn't have an Animal Farm in your repertoire.
no, I have read Animal Farm.
You have, no,
Yeah.
I mean in the lectures that you were given.
No. I could tell Jacques Cui later why I had to be given Sekou Touré on Islam.
Thank you so much, Mr. Afif. It's always a pleasure to have you. You're always very clear and very interesting.
Organized.
And well organized, exactly. Very well organized. We have no further questions. If there's anything you'd like to add.
I think as always, I've always overstepped my line and said too much, probably.
It's always very interesting, you know, and it's great that you've got such a good memory, right? So it's very helpful. So we will adjourn now, and we will not be returning because the 3 o'clock witness is unwell and has produced a sick certificate. So we will adjourn, and we will return tomorrow at 11 a.m.
All rise.